Hello everyone, just a little quick intro here for what I'm going to show you today. And you can see I've made a little swatch of different crochet stitches. And so we will go through single crochet, half double crochet, and the double crochet. And with those three stitches you can do quite a lot. You could keep going along, just make this could become like a nice little scarf if I kept going along with it. Also show you inadvertently how to do some color changes, but as a beginner you could just work with one color yarn, and the idea too that with crochet it's so textural, and you just building it up with using the different heights of the stitches and sometimes even making thicker stitches, but today we're just going to start off with the basics to get you going. I'm working with just a regular weight. It's called worsted weight, medium weight. It's a number 4, and this is acrylic yarn. When you would purchase a package of yarn, you can see on the label it will say, medium or bulky or fingering weight. There's lots of different weights. Usually tells you what the contents of it are. This one happens to be an 80% acrylic, 20% wool. It will suggest what hook or needle you should be using. Needle if you're knitting, or crochet hook, and this does suggest for medium weight to use a size J to generally get the gauge, but it might depend on the project. What you're doing, you may use a slightly larger hook. You might use a smaller hook, also depending on how tightly you crochet and what you need to do to adjust for your gauge, which is just how many stitches per inch, to help when you're making a pattern. Starting off though, just playing with it, having fun, you can just simply make a scarf or a washcloth, and you don't have to worry so much about the gauge because you're just here to practice in the beginning. Alright, so that's what that is all about. Also, you'll see on a label it'll tell you, how much it weighs and how many yards are on the ball of yarn that you have, or the skein. So that can be helpful, again, when you're looking at different kinds of patterns and to see how much yarn you're going to need. So I do have 3 different styles of J hooks in my collection. So just to show you that, there are different styles. They'll all work. You might find the one you like. This one has a little more, you can see it's kind of a rounded hook, and I don't know what brand this is because it doesn't say. It's just green. It might be a Boy, I think it is. It's B-O-Y-E. This one's also a little bit rounded, just happens to be orange. And then there's this one that's a Susan Bates, and it has, a much sharper hook point. Some people prefer that, some people do not. So just kind of whatever will work. You'll find your way, and whatever you can find at the craft store if you need to be purchasing something like that. Hooks don't cost very much, and you can also buy them in multi-packs, so you'll get different sizes, which is really useful when you're just starting off. And especially because this I have here is a K hook, and it is nice to have, oh, this is a Boy, B-O-Y-E. Not quite the same. That's probably what these are, but for some reason it's just not written on there. Alright, so it's good to have a slightly larger hook size for making your foundation row. So that's going to be a set of chains. Depending on how big the project is, you have a certain number that you would do. And it's nice to have a slightly bigger hook because it's easier then to work into those chains. And I'm going to show you that now. Move those off to the side for a moment. Okay, so I just have some scrap yarn here. It's not going to take a lot of yarn to practice with. First thing you will need to do is to make a slip knot. So I can demonstrate for you. You just take that little curve and fold, this is the tail, take it over on top of the working yarn, fold your loop over, and you got kind of a pretzel shape there. Hold on to the tail and the working end of the yarn, and now this is the working yarn, this is the tail. So you want to go under that working yarn with your hook and just pull it, and it makes that nice slip knot so that it can move and get as tight as you need. You want it just to be just a little bit looser loose on the hook so it moves. Okay, so the first step is the chaining, which I showed you in the granny square video, but if this is the first one you're watching, I'll just show you. Holding the hook in my right hand, because I am right-handed. If you're left-handed, there are videos out there you can search for left-handed if that will help you. Some people who are left-handed still crochet right-handed. So I'm holding the hook comfortably in my hand, and I'm going to use my right index finger to hold that loop in place so it doesn't slide around. You'll find a way, I wrap the working yarn around my left hand a little bit to hold it, and I'm going to hold with my thumb and middle index finger, yarn over, which means you're wrapping it around the hook. And so again, you're bringing it towards you. And now I'm going to hold on to the knot with my left index finger and thumb, and then just using my right hand with that hook, it's going to hook onto the yarn and pull through, and that's making a chain. Okay, so zoomed in a little closer so you can see. Yarn over, pulling that loop through, just making a series of chains. Okay, so I always am holding that working section with my left hand to keep it stable, and using my right hand to kind of twist and pull the hook. Just be careful not to be working your wrist too much. It's a pretty subtle turning of the hook. And it's good to kind of pull that open. It helps keep that loop open that's on the hook. As you can see as I pull this through. I'm going to work with probably a short set of about 15 chains, but let's see how many we have right now. So if you can see these little V shapes, oops, that's upside down. If you can see the V shapes, that is how you can start to notice your stitches. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 chains. Something got a little bit twisted while I was doing this. Okay. Great, now I get to start this whole fucking thing over. Okay, so I'm going to start off showing you making a slip knot to get the yarn onto your hook. So we'll just start with the tail here, and this is going to be the working yarn. Take the tail over the working yarn, bring this loop and fold it over so you make a pretzel shape. Now this one is the working yarn, this one is the tail. Slip the hook under, hold on to the working yarn and the tail, and pull it up, making that loop on the hook. And now it's a slip knot, so I can pull it as tight as I need. You want it to be able to move on the hook so it's not tight all the way down. Okay, first thing we need to do is make the foundation row where it's a chain stitch, which is something you use sometimes in projects, but it's always the way you would start a project, and even a granny square. So we have to start off with chains, and we work into those chains to make other stitches that build up the work. Okay, so I'm holding the hook in my right hand. I'm right-handed. If you're left-handed, there's some videos out there. You can always search how to crochet left hand, or you try it. Even if you're left-handed, I know a lot of people dominant left hand but do crochet with the hook in the right hand. And you do use both hands in this. So even though you only have the one hook, I mean, knitting definitely 2 needles, but you do use both hands. So I'm going to have my working yarn kind of just wrapped around my hand comfortably. You find the way to hold your yarn as you go, over time. But just kind of holding it so there's some tension to it. And I'm going to use my right finger to keep this loop from moving around, because otherwise as I try to yarn around the hook, it just keeps spinning. So we're going to keep it in place, hold it down with my right index finger, bring the yarn over the hook, so you're bringing it towards you, and then I pinch with my left index and finger and left thumb to kind of hold this and hold tight, and it's helping to hold that loop a little bit open. And then with the right hand, I can just slide the hook, a subtle little turn to keep it hooked on the, keep that yarn hooked, and then just pull right through. All right, so we'll do that a few more times. We're going to have a working chain of about 15 today. So that was one. And just yarn over and pull it through. And try not to use your wrists too much in this. You know, you can learn some dexterity eventually with just kind of using your fingers to turn the hook and using your left hand to keep this open, pulling it open, pulling it through. And so it's good to have this hook that's bigger because see how I have nice open chains. You want to make sure you're not pulling that chain tight after you bring the yarn over through. So you're going to yarn over, pull it through, and you don't have to, and you don't want it real big, but you don't have to pull it really tight on there either. So you just keep it open. With practice, you'll get more consistent with your chaining. Okay, so as we're going along, you can see the different stitches, especially because it's pretty big. This yarn, or this hook, bigger than what the yarn usually calls for. But it nicely illustrates. You can see these V shapes and make up each stitch, each chain stitch. So let's see, we have how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13. I'll just do a couple more. 14 and 15. Okay, so the first stitch we're going to do today is called single crochet. It's a stitch you use a lot in amigurumi. It's used in a lot of different kinds of patterns. Makes it a nice tight, because it's a small stitch, so it's good for something like a dishcloth. A lot of what you... So, to work back along the chain, you need to do what is called, or back along the row, even while you're crocheting your project, you need to do what's called a turning chain. So a project may ask you to start off chaining 15 stitches, you know, and then +1 for a turning chain. Okay, so I'm going to just do chain 1, and then now I'm going to start working my foundation row. So this is a turning chain, so I'm not using that one. I'm not going to go directly into it. I'm going to go into the one that's next to it. And it's just poking your hook through. And it's ready in position to pull that yarn. It's a yarn over, so you're just pulling up a loop. So you say I have 2 loops on my hook, yarn over, and hold on to the work so it helps keep the loops open and stable, and then just pulling it through makes a single crochet. So I'm just going to go again, yarn over, and yarn over again, pull through those 2 loops. Okay, and just be aware that you're not twisting your chain. I'm just trying to work right now right into just that top, that loop that's like kind of resting on the top of the row. So again, just poking it through. Oh, I forgot to change my hook. We have to go back. Got carried away. All right, so I'm going to move into using the hook that's the appropriate size for this yarn, which is the J. All right. So again, turning chain, don't use that first, not using the first one, but using this one here. So I'm going to go through, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. Holding on, yarn over, pull through those 2. poking it through, and already the yarn's laying in place, so I can just pull it right up, pull up 2 loops, yarn over, pull through 2, and that's making the single crochet stitch. So I'll just keep working along the row because I want to show you what happens when we get to the end. And it's nice to have that nice open chain to work in since I used a bigger hook. It's not just a beginner technique. There's people everywhere that do that regularly for their projects. It's a lot easier to work into that foundation row if it's been made by a hook that's just a little bit larger than what you're going to use for the project. And it's okay because the chain also tends to tighten up on you as you work, so it's not like it's going to be out of shape for the project. Okay, so I've slowed this next portion down to show you. Put your hook through that loop, yarn over, pull up a loop, and then yarn over again, and pull through those 2 loops for the single crochet. Okay, and we're at that last one. And there is, whoops, our first row. And you can see these are the single crochets. And now it's going to be really easy to see the stitches as well on top. Again, they still have that V formation. So we were only working into one of the loops. Now you work under both loops as you do the rest of the stitching around the rest of the row. So let's do one more row of the single crochet. Okay, so the first thing you need to do when you get to the end of the row, I'm working in single crochet, so it's a chain 1. And what that is doing is helping to create your row height. In the granny square video, I showed you do 3 chains to begin when you're working with a double crochet. Okay, so we did chain 1, and now you can turn. And some patterns will use the turning chain as a stitch and some will not. I am going to use it as the first stitch, just because otherwise I feel like it gets too bulky along the edge. It's just my preference. Often the turning chain does count as your first stitch. Unless you're working, sometimes the more textural, complicated fan stitches, things like that, it might not. It just, like I said, it depends on the designer's preference. For today, we will count the turning chain as the first stitch. So moving along to our second row of single crochet. See the V. I have my finger holding that yarn in place and holding the work in my left hand. So I'm kind of pinching gently with the index and thumb, and then I have my yarn wrapped around my hand. So that's the first stitch. We're going to go into the second stitch because we already did that chain 1. All right, so in we go. Pull up a loop. I have 2 loops on my hook. Yarn over. Again, holding the work so I can kind of pull my stitches open. And then all I have to do is kind of gently twist with my fingers and I can bring the hook through. Okay, so again, we go in and going under both loops, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. And that's going to be, whoops, a single crochet. If all you did was yarn over and go like pull right through, that's going to be called a slip stitch because it doesn't really have much height. It can make a really dense fabric, and you do use that sometimes. It's a technique you'll see in some patterns. But just make sure, when you're doing single crochet that you're making that extra, right? So you poke it through, pull up a loop, you have to yarn over. So you really have 3 loops right now, but you're using these 2 as the working loops to pull through, and you have 1 loop. So just moving along down the row. And then I've sped this section up just to get us there quicker. And I have one more stitch. And we are complete. And so I did do an extra chain one during the foundation as a turning chain. And for single crochet, I'm not going to count that as a stitch. If it was double crochet, we would be working into the top of that 3 chain. And I will be getting along to that soon. But for now, I'm going to move on to the half double crochet. So I'm going to change color for doing the half double crochet. And my technique for doing that, I have my 2 loops on my hook. Let's go back. So I poked it through and did a yarn over, and now I have 2 loops on my hook. Now I'm going to start with this blue yarn, just laying it over and pulling up a loop. This can be a little bit tricky, but I think even though you're a beginner, it's still a good technique to know, changing your colors. You could also just keep working with one color yarn when you're first practicing. I'm just changing colors to help illustrate the different stitches a little more clearly. Alright, so now I'm just going to tie these 2 tails together. Alright, and my new working yarn is secure and ready to go. Okay, so we're working the half double crochet. And to do that, it's a little bit taller of a stitch, so it requires 2 chains to start. So I'm going to yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull up a loop, and that's 2 chains, and then turn the work. And sometimes, you know, this is not counted as a stitch, but I'm going to use it for today, because there's another thing to illustrate is how to work into that chain. So it's good to be aware not to pull that top chain too tightly when you're crocheting, because you're going to go back into that chain. So I'm just going to try to make that a little bit looser, keep that nice and open, so don't pull that chain tight. So we're not going into this stitch, because we just did the turning chain, and that's going to count as my first half double crochet. So half double crochet, you have to build it up by 1 more. So we're going to yarn over to begin. Poke the hook through, pull up a loop. There are now 3 loops on the hook. Yarn over, pull through all 3 loops. Again, you yarn over to start. So right now I've got 2. Poke it through and pull up a 3rd loop. Yarn over, pull through all 3. And that's going to make the half double crochet. Yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 3. Yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, and pull through 3. So I have a slow motion piece here again to watch the stitch being made. Again, it begins with a yarn over, and then you poke it through the stitch below and pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through all 3 loops. And holding it all with that right index finger each time I have a yarn over, like the loop that's closest to the end of the hook is the one I tend to hold. I don't have to hold all of them initially. So yarn over, pulling up a loop. And so I'm just holding that one in place because it affects the tension of those 2. Yarn over, and I'm holding onto the work, pulling those loops kind of open as I pull the yarn through. And so this is the fun thing with crochet. Each row you can choose, you know, a new stitch, a different stitch. Okay, so now we're at the end, and I just have that funky little chain 1 stitch that we used as the turning chain. And so it's kind of tough to see it. You just kind of have to do your best to find the working loop. You kind of work your hook into it, and then I'm going to also go under that loop, going under 2 of the loops, pulling up. Okay, so that part can always be really tricky. But you'll start to find your way. So I'm going to chain 2, turn, yarn over. That's first stitch. That's the turning chain took care of that, so I'm working into the second stitch. Going under the both loops, pull up, pull through all 3. Yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 3. Okay, and you can see now how that's a little bit taller than the single crochet. It's not quite double, but it's higher. This also makes a nice dense fabric, and because it's a little bit taller, you can work a little bit quicker. I'm just trying to get to the end of the row so you can see that chain a little bit easier with the half double crochet. Find that turning chain and how to crochet into it. Okay, there we are. So you can kind of see those 2 chains. You can see it better from the other side. There. So we're trying to go under these 2 loops. You can see them there. So it often might just take, kind of wedging it because it gets tight. Just poke your hook through and find that other loop. And there you go. You want to go under 2 loops. If you just go under 1, it kind of leaves a big hole. So you can see I have 1 bar. Each stitch is made up of, at the top it has like 3 bars, you'll see. Okay, so I forgot to yarn over first. Got so excited. Okay, here we go. And pull through 3. We're at the end of my row. The next stitch I'm going to show you is the double crochet, and I undid that last stitch a little bit so I can do a color change. And again, I just make a loop with the new color over the hook, and holding onto the work, I'm going to tighten those loops down a little bit, pull that through all 3. So then my working yarn is a new color, and I'm going to chain 3, for the start of the double crochet. Now it's also good to anchor the yarns. Normally I would also recommend leaving a much longer tail because you weave the tails in using like a blunt yarn needle or tapestry needle. So it's good to have a little more there. Normally when you're working on a project and doing color changes, you want to have a little more of a tail of yarn to work with so you can weave it in there securely. And maybe even as a beginner, don't fuss so much about changing colors unless, but sometimes it's fun. I don't want to discourage you from that. But when you really are just practicing these stitches the first time, you could just keep going with the same color. And that can also add interest in a project to have, one color yarn but with the different stitches, the different sizes, because it's so textural. Okay, so we are doing double crochet, and it begins with 3 chains to get to the proper row height. And then we'll turn the work. Again, I'm using the turning chain as my first stitch of the row, so I'm going to move on to this stitch here. So we yarn over, insert the hook, pull up a loop. So we have 3 loops again on the hook, just like the half double crochet. Yarn over, pull through only 2, leaving 2, yarn over, pull through 2 again. Alright, so very similar, but there's that extra step, so we can get that extra height. So yarn over, pulling up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2 loops, yarn over, and pull through 2 loops. Okay, yarn over. And I'm bringing my index and thumb to the work to hold it tight, and that helps keep tension on these loops as well. Yarn over, and then I can just use a subtle little twist with my fingers to pull all through, to not do half double, but to do double. Let's try that again. I get talking, I get distracted. Okay, so pull through 2, pull through 2. Yarn over. Okay, so double crochet used again a lot in, it's a very commonly used in granny squares. It's a stitch that's used in a lot. It tends to be the basis for a lot of other stitches along the way. And that's the neat thing with crochet. It's not smooth like knitting. It does create pretty bumpy fabric, but some stitches, there's puff stitches and things like that that create a lot of texture, different heights. For example, the next step from a double crochet would be a triple crochet, and for that one you would just yarn over again. So you have more loops on the hook, so that you see has 4. You kind of have to pull it up higher, and then you would just again pull through 2, pull through 2, pull through 2, and it makes it even taller. Well, let's just finish this row. And then again, we're at that turning chain, and I left it nice and open, so it's pretty easy to see where I need to put my hook. Just poke it through, making sure you go under 2 loops. Pull up a loop, and now we've yarned over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, and there is our completed row of the double crochet. You can see the different heights of the stitches, the single, the half double, and the double. And can be pleasing and of interest to work with those different row heights in a project, such as, a scarf or something like that. One more thing I want to show you is how you would create a foundation row for a project that would be starting with a double crochet as opposed to a single crochet row. So this is just a very short little example. So as a little mini chain, and then you would have your project, your foundation row as long as you want it, and then to start you will begin to make 3 more chains, which will serve as your first double crochet of the row because it's going to help create the row height. So you can see 1, 2, 3. So then I'll start by crocheting into that 4th chain from the hook. So yarn over and insert into the chain, yarn over again and pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2 loops. And you can see that that chain, is helping with the height. And now let's keep going to get to the end. So you just keep doing the double crochet stitch. Into each chain. And it's kind of curling up a bit because this is really tiny. That's okay. All right. And then chain 3, 1, 2, 3, turn the work. And for me, that turning chain counts as my first stitch of the row. So now I yarn over and work into this next stitch. And I just wanted to show you this because when I did the foundation of single crochet in the foundation row, we didn't use the turning chain at the end. If you recall that. If not, you can always rewind. But in this instance, you do need to do one more stitch into that turning chain at the end of the row. So again, I'm going to begin with a yarn over, and you can see the V of that stitch. So I'm going to work my hook in. I'm going to kind of pull it tight so it's a little bit tricky. Getting it under both loops. Yarn over, pull up a loop. Alright. So again, when you're starting that foundation row, however many chains, and then just add, if it's half double crochet, you would add 2, you would add 3 for the double crochet, and that's your turning chain. And for most of my projects that I work, the turning chain will always count as the first stitch in the row. Alright, so the one last thing I wanted to talk to you about are crochet symbols and their abbreviations, which are really helpful to learn so that you can know those for working patterns. A lot of patterns are written with the symbols, they're graphs or charts, and that's really helpful when the pattern's written in a language that maybe you don't speak. I know I've found a lot of great patterns in Russian. I have a couple of Japanese crochet books, and I don't speak the language, so I can't read the instructions without having somebody translate it, but I can look at the symbols of the pattern and know how to do it. So I have this book in my personal library, the Donna Cooler Encyclopedia of Crochet, and I still reference it to this day, especially because it has these different stitch patterns. So sometimes when I'm trying to figure out, what I want to do, it's a useful resource. In the front of the book, she lists the frequently used abbreviations. So, for example, the CH chains, that's what we used for creating the foundation row, and a DC double crochets was something that we made today. The half double crochet, and also did the single crochet. And you can see there are lots of other stitches, but primarily they are based on those basic stitches that we learned today. In fact, here's even turning chain for height. We talked about a little bit. On the back of the book are crochet symbols, or chart symbols, and these are the same universally, like I was saying, so it doesn't matter what language the pattern's in. If you know these chart symbols, you would be able to learn the pattern. And you can see here that is a symbol for the chain stitch. The single crochet is plus sign. Half double crochet, it looks like a letter T. The double crochet, we get a little bar. Treble crochet, which was one more, right? It has another little bar, and it just kind of keeps adding bars to indicate it's a taller stitch. And then there's, symbols for all these other stitches that you could work with. And this is an example of a crochet chart pattern for it's a granny square motif. And so you can see there are different level stitches. There's these chain stitches in between. It has a double crochet. It looks like there's a treble crochet right in there. Okay, yeah, and those are useful to know when we have something like this. Open stitch is nice. Double crochet and a chain stitch, your chain stitch foundation. So that would be a couple examples of crochet charts. And all that information is pretty easily found online if you just Google it. And I often still do that to this day. If I need to learn a new stitch, I will Google how to do whatever the name of that stitch is. And again, just the building blocks of your single crochet, half double, and double crochet. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Please go ahead and like it if you did, and subscribe to our channel. If you had any questions, go ahead and leave them in the comments, and I will look for them. Thanks again for watching, and have a great day.